Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Writers Podcast. I have with me today guest writer Kay Sparling. Hello, Kay. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And you are a guest that has a very unique background. I've never run across a writer with this type of background, so we'll get into that. But first, let's talk about your book and what's it called and what's your elevator pitch for it?
My book is called Mission Thaw, and it is set in the Cold War, at the very end of the Cold War. Um, Most of it is set in Austria,
Mm,
and it the protagonist is Kaitlyn Stewart, who is an opera singer. She goes
mhm,
over on a Fulbright and does an apprenticeship with Vienna State Opera. And just after a few days there, she is actually confronted by the CIA
mm,
and asked if she would join them in a mission. They need a particular type of operatic soprano, and Kaitlyn had just won a whole lot of international competitions. So they felt like they had to find someone with that kind of virtuosity
mm,
to help them in a special mission. And that mission had to do with a Western dirty businessman politician that
mm,
was helping the KGB in East Germany and the East Germans to take the refugees that had been released from the USSR, countries like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, so on and so forth.
okay,
Um, and when the USS pulled out of those countries, they left them in complete anarchy. There
right.
was no infrastructure. It was those people had nothing to eat. Water wasn't running, electricity wasn't going. And so naturally, they're going to take what they have and they're going to flee to a Western country.
Okay,
For a lot of them, that closest Western country was Austria. And
right.
so, therefore, they were looking for work, they were looking for housing, they were looking for some kind of new life.
Okay.
Well, the Western world did not want them. And so organizations like the American Red Cross and the Catholic Social Services and the UN were there building these large refugee camps because the Austrians just said, "We don't want you, go away, and we're not
Mm-hmm.
going to help you." Um, I was there at the time, and one of the things that an apprentice does is they have to work in the churches. We also do sacred music like oratorio and such. It's not just all opera,
Okay.
but it's all classical music. So I was working in the largest cathedrals, in the Vienna area, and I started hearing about these refugee camps from the
Mm,
priest because priests were going out there to try to aid. And I became really good friends with the priest. And he said, well, at some point, he said, you're very influential in the opera world. Do you think you could get some of these people to donate money to help these people?
mm,
So I made my way out there at some point and just was blown away with what was going on there.
mm.
And so got personally involved at that point.
Okay.
Um, so what these businessmen were doing, they were the middlemen for the KGB in the East Germany. They would go to these camps and they would tell the refugees, "Oh, listen, if you come to East Germany, we've got jobs, we've got housing, we've got health care, your family's going to be good." Now, you would have thought these refugees would have been skeptical of that since they just got released from a communist country to go rushing back into one. But these people were desperate and the Westerners didn't want them. Well, what would initially happen is they'd all go, "Oh, yeah, 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 yeah." And then there would be this mass exit out of the refugee camps and they'd get on trains. And then what really happened is somewhere between that point, let's say Vienna and East Germany, they would stop while they were still in a Western country. It might be Germany, it might be Austria, whatever. And they would have these basically, slave auctions.
Hmm.
And they would break up the families. They'd send the children and the old people or anyone that couldn't work back to the camps. And then they would, anyone young, they would put in a work camp, which was very, very similar to the concentration camps. There was no way out once you got in, and they
Hmm.
didn't take care of them at all. And then with a lot of the women and even some of the beautiful men, they would put in the underground brothels in like East Germany.
Hmm.
So it was not what they promised whatsoever.
Right.
And this slave trade was literally, this human trafficking was literally keeping East Germany afloat. Their economy was tanking just like USSR's. So
Hmm.
this was a way to keep these big manufacturers and these big farms and everything going. And so the CIA and the MI6 and the UN and all these people, NATO, they decided, well, if we can stop this human trafficking, then they're going to come down.
Hmm.
And the Berlin Wall will tumble. And so Kaitlyn Stewart is asked to become a part of the CIA team, which is also combined with an MI6 team, because this businessman I told you that ran so much of it,
Hmm.
he was an absolute, he he thought there was God and then there was Mozart. Okay. And he was such an opera fan and just expert on Mozart opera.
Hmm.
And one of his, he was keeping the Vienna State Opera open with his money. And he had a big box seat up here. He could come anytime. And so we were told as apprentices, well, if, this man approaches you, oh, bend over backwards, because
Hmm.
he's the one that's actually keeping us afloat right now. And so this man just happened to really, really, really like Mozart. And so Kaitlyn Stewart was a Mozart soprano, and she was
Okay.
everything he was looking for. Now,
Hmm.
he was really a sick man mentally. Okay. So he is looking for a soprano that he can claim is Austrians. So he can
Okay.
say, Austrian has the greatest Mozart prima donna to ever live.
Hmm.
And so that, a lot of people say, well, Kaitlyn Stewart, an opera singer, why would the CIA ask her?
Right.
And the truth is that usually they wouldn't, obviously, okay.
Hmm.
But in this case, they needed a virtuoso that could break in to his social group and and actually gather information. A lot of spies, that's all they do is gather information. They're not asked to do anything else and then report it back. Well, the regular CIA agent wasn't going to infiltrate his social, group,
Right.
but a prima donna that he's trying to sponsor, definitely. I mean, and they would have all the training as a diva to deal with heads of state, to deal with big balls and know
Hmm.
which is the shrimp forks, so to speak.
Okay.
And so this was perfect if that soprano could get his attention, then she could, meet his wife and just slowly get into there and be
Hmm.
trusted, and they'd never suspect that she's collecting the information she is.
Okay. Well, Kay, I
And
have to
so
say that's the longest elevator ride I've ever been on. I was expecting you to say it's something like opera meets James Bond or something like that.
no, no, no. So
So,
anyway,
so
that
you've given
that's
us a good background on the
yeah.
book, and one of the sayings of writers that writers are told, or advice that writers is given, is write what you know. And your background obviously fits very well into this because you were an international opera and singer. So your background, you obviously use that to write the book. Um,
Hmm.
and this is your first book, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so what prompted you to write a book?
It started out as a PTSD project.
Oh, for PTSD for what? For
Um,
retiring?
Pardon me?
For retiring?
No, no,
No?
PTSD, post traumatic syndrome
Mhm.
disorder. Um, I had been, I had, I was the cantor that did all the 9/11 funerals when that
Oh,
happened. I was
oh my
living in New
goodness.
York at the time and lost, you know, scores of people,
Mhm.
friends, relatives, that kind of thing, and then was asked to do the 9/11 funerals.
Mm,
And after that, I was suffering, well, a lot of us New Yorkers were suffering from PTSD.
sure.
So, in my treatment, someone said, well, maybe you should try to write it down. Obviously,
Mhm.
there's music therapy, there's art therapy for PTSD, but this person thought that maybe it would be good for me to write.
Okay.
And so I just, I didn't really want to write about 9/11,
Mm,
just because it was so personal for me and I had lost so many people. So
mhm.
what I decided to do is go back and think of other traumatic things that I was, working through. And I came upon this one,
Okay.
and decided to start writing a story. And so for me, it was for therapy. But then the person that was treating me down, at the Naval Center, he was like, well, this is really, really a good story. Have
Mm,
you ever thought about, you know, publishing it? And I was like, oh, I don't know how to write. And I didn't. And he
mhm.
said, well, go learn, you know?
Right.
So that's what I did. I went to the university system here in my state and started taking some writing classes, and I would always be encouraged with this story,
Mhm.
And at one point, one of my professors even said, hey, would you like to co-author? And I thought about that for a while. I went, no, this is my story. I really want to do it myself.
Mhm.
And so that's how it happened. And then I would have friends read it, and then, I just kept getting encouragement. And after 5 editions, we
Drafts.
finally we
Yeah.
finally got a book. Yeah.
Right.
And it took some time because life happens, and then we get put on the shelf for a little bit. Like, for instance, COVID.
Mhm.
I had a big music school. I'd retired from opera singing, and it was closed. And so I had to literally go out and train for a new career so I
Mm.
could make a living. And so therefore I didn't have much time for the book, but always came back to it, and it finally got released in August of 2024.
Okay. So how many years are we talking about from the first time somebody mentioned that to till you got it published?
Well, I think the first time I decided, yes, I'm going to try to write a book and get it published was 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And before that, were you a big reader at all?
I've always been a huge reader all
Okay.
my life, all my
And what
life.
type of fiction do you like to read? Or
I like,
nonfiction?
well, I mean, I've read a lot of nonfiction. Obviously, I have a few degrees under my belt,
Mhm.
um, um, and I would say my very first book that had an incredible impression on me and made me a reader was My Antonina by Willa Cather.
Okay.
I really, really liked her work.
Mm.
And so, what I decided before I went to college is I'm going to pick an author, I'm going to read everything they wrote. And then I'll pick
Okay.
another author and I'll read everything they wrote. And this went on for 20, 25 years.
Mhm.
And when I was in Europe, the hardest thing for me, because yes, I do speak German. Yes, I do speak Italian, but I want to read when I'm just relaxing. I want to read a novel in English. And at
Right.
that time, when I was living over there, those were hard to find. And
Mm.
if you did, my goodness, they cost like $50,
Oh my goodness.
for one. Yeah, it was crazy. And so my family just started sending me scads of boxes of books,
Oh, nice.
and so I was even able to continue it over there. And
Hmm.
I still read a lot. I still read
Okay.
a lot.
And what type of fiction do you gravitate towards?
I like mysteries a lot nowadays. All
Hmm.
kinds of mysteries, both the gritty kind and the cozy kind.
Okay.
I like thrillers.
Hmm.
I obviously like espionage thrillers.
Sure.
And one thing that disturbs me about those is that very few of the protagonists are women. And
Mm.
I think that's one thing that's different about my book. There are more coming out now, but
Hmm.
10 years ago you could hardly find one,
Right.
And then I think what changed my mind about, well, that could change is that I started seeing movies and I started seeing other books that
Right.
finally had women, probably, well, starting about World War II on, you know.
Hmm.
I mean, we're still uncommon, but, you know, there are more of us now.
Yeah. Yes. That's good timing for you, I guess. That sort of came about while you were uh, getting your feet under yourself as a writer. Um, do you your stories? Would you say that this first book and that this is you intend this to be a series, correct?
Yes, it is a series.
Okay. And did you find? Uh, I'm kind of guessing that this first book sounds sort of autobiographical.
Um, Parts of it,
Parts of it, yeah.
um, you know, and like I tell everybody, I'm at a liberty, to talk about a lot of things,
Hmm.
about myself. But um, yes, parts of it definitely are.
Okay. And did you find it? I'm trying to. What's the word I'm searching for? That writing it out helps you process some of the things that you had gone through that you mentioned with like the PTSD and that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this book, well, as I went through those different drafts, I started out, well, not maybe like a cozy mystery, but certainly
Hmm.
holding back, holding back. But then my editors just kept saying, well, I went to I signed up for a James Patterson master class. And the TA I had there was like, no, tell us more. I know there's more. And so we just kept going until it was all told. And at that point, yes, I think it became very therapeutic. Um,
Okay.
there's some very graphic things in this book, and they're all
Okay.
true. They're all true. This book
All right.
is based on fact.
Okay. And what does the title have a significance? Mission Thaw? Does that?
Yeah, yeah. It's near the end of the war,
Okay.
and it has a lot of different um, connotations. But one of them is her trainer, the MI6 officer, who is supposedly the best agent in the free world.
Hmm.
Um, this person was the person Fleming used to go to for research
Mm.
before he would write another book. So we're talking very, very experienced spy. He has been fighting the Cold War his entire life.
Okay.
So to see that Berlin Wall come down, the Clive Matthews character definitely everyone sees a thaw in him.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, when the wall does come down, that is really, really the beginning of the ending of the Cold War. So,
Right.
so
Is
it has
and
a lot of different stories that go with the thaw.
Okay. And your protagonist, Kaitlyn Stewart, is she like? I'm always fascinated by names. Was it hard for you to choose her name, and how did you settle on the one that you came up with?
Um, I had a little fun with that because I have a very Scottish name. My father came from Scotland. And
Okay.
so I thought, well, why not give her the same initials, but give
Hmm.
her a Scottish name, both first and last. And that's sort of what I did with all the characters, because a lot of these characters are real people. And
Okay.
so obviously I'm fictionalizing the whole thing. And so I'm trying to think, okay, that person's from England. So
Right.
what I would literally do is just look at the most common names for males, and then pick one, and then
Right.
pick and I just
Hmm.
kept doing that. And with Kaitlyn, I just decided, yeah, it'd be fun to have my initials. So I went with a Scottish name too,
Oh,
Kaitlyn Stewart.
okay. Now, does Kaitlyn, are you planning like an arcing journey for her through the series? Because in series
Absolutely.
books, the character usually progresses and changes or whatever. Like, is there some sort of mystery backstory that she's trying to solve, or anything of that nature?
Well, what's going to happen with Kaitlyn, and it happened through the first book, and it will continue much more, is
Hmm.
that she becomes a real combat field agent.
Mm.
She's not just an information gatherer.
Okay.
So her responsibility, she gets promotion after promotion, and pretty soon she's the boss of the
Mm.
second mission. The
Okay.
second book, and so, and what's um, emotionally the content of Kaitlyn is she keeps getting further withdrawn and withdrawn and withdrawn, that the CIA is just sucking her up.
Right.
And,
So, does she have like family that are wondering like what's happening, or?
well, there's two kinds of CIA agents. There's the kind that tell their family,
Hmm.
and there's the kind that don't.
Okay.
And that is usually completely up to them. Now, even the ones that tell them, they can't tell them details, but they can say that they are in.
Okay.
And I have seen both types of agents
Hmm.
for a long period of time now. And I'll tell you what, I would never be one of those that wouldn't tell my family,
Okay.
because I saw an instance one time where um, a person thought, the family thought this person was just going over to conduct, an orchestra.
Hmm.
And a neo Nazi group one night threw him in front of a train.
Mm.
Lots of explaining here to do, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
then how does that family feel that they didn't know that that person was in a dangerous situation,
Hmm.
And so I think that's kind of shabby to treat your family and your
Okay.
closest friends like that. So if I were an agent, I would tell my family.
Right.
Um, and Kaitlyn is that type of agent. She does tell her mother. And then
Okay.
it's always funny because they let her call her every other week on because you got, back then, we're talking, things under the ocean. So you'd hear that, you know,
Yeah.
and, mom's always asking questions she shouldn't answer, and
Hmm.
so like, let's change the subject. But
Okay.
family learns, after about a year, like, okay, I'm not going to ask questions. I'm just glad you're on leave and I can see you.
Right. Right.
And so,
So, with your background, did you have to ever rein yourself in from getting too into the wood the grass with talking about opera?
um, I, I want the opera is many times the setting,
Hmm.
because you remember the main antagonist is that guy at the Vienna State Opera.
Yep. Yeah.
So, it comes in, it threads throughout the story,
Hmm.
and it will keep threading through the story, because even in the second book, she starts out, with a cover as a singer to get where she needs to be.
Okay.
Okay, so that's always going to be her cover,
Hmm.
but that's also who she really is.
Right.
I mean, she really did, she was a graduate student in opera, and she did win those competitions, and she does stand on the stage at the state opera and get, incredible
Hmm.
accolades.
Right.
So, this is always a part of her. And at that point, early on, it's much more a part of her than being a CIA agent.
Sure.
So, yeah, that's going to come through. And there's one scene that is out in the woods in the Alps that she actually uses her voice to, protect them. And I don't want
Hmm.
to give that away, but
Sure. Sure. Okay, interesting. I just wondered if you ever got feedback from your beta readers saying, like, there's just a little too much opera talk in here. Don't really need to know all these various levels of whatever complexity that you might be talking about from a opera point of view. Did you ever get that kind of feedback, or?
I didn't, because I don't think there's that much opera in it, as a
Okay.
whole. It's a lot
All
more
right.
action. Yeah.
Interesting.
More
Now,
more more politics and action than the
all
opera.
right. So then that's on the flip side, because you're getting into the spy world. I don't know how much spy craft you had before you wrote the book, but I imagine that took a bit of research.
Oh, yeah, and I know a lot of spies, so I could just call them.
Oh, okay. Well, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. So,
There
this,
I did get one comment from a reviewer. I mean, my reviews have been really good, my editorial reviews, but, he was like, "I think you can really tell she's an opera singer, but I'm not sure about the spy stuff," and I thought, "No, I don't think so,"
oh, okay.
considering I asked the real deal, so,
Right.
but
Right.
whatever.
What about the time period? Did you have to research that very much? And did you choose that on purpose so that you wouldn't have to deal with like cell phones and things like that? Or
Well, actually, mobile phones were around for the CIA and MI6, but only the big chiefs got those. I mean, they
okay,
were just hitting.
right.
So, but yeah, the definitely the technology was different back then. And so we
Hmm.
were still planting bugs all the time. And that's one thing Kaitlyn, as an information gatherer, and she's in the villa, she's
Right.
always planting bugs.
Mm,
It's something we don't have to do so much now.
right.
But back then they did. And so the reason I picked the year that I did is because all this happened. This is still based on fact, you have to remember.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. So this is your first book in missions. What's the name of the series? Is it Mission Thaw, or oh no, is it Kaitlyn Stewart Spy or
Spy
Thriller?
thrillers, yeah,
Okay.
and
Do you have
mis
an idea of how many books you're going to have in the series, or
I think it's gonna be a trilogy.
a trilogy? Okay.
Mhm.
Very cool. And you're currently working on the new book right now?
Yes, it's,
And do you have a working title?
Mission Impromptu,
Mission Impromptu. Oh, very nice. Very
because
nice.
she has to go off orders, so she's
Oh,
basically AWOL. Yeah.
okay. And is there any romantic elements in your story? Like, does
Oh,
Caitlin have a
yes.
suitors or?
Oh, yeah, Kaitlyn loves her men.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a dash of romance. It's not a huge part of the story, but it's one that I'm told that everybody follows and, keeps hoping and keeps hoping. Yeah, there is a romance that develops,
Okay.
Caitlin with one of her team.
Okay. Very cool. So yeah, when are you planning to have your next book out?
Well, I'm trying to get it finished by the middle of July.
Okay.
So,
And then from there, it takes what, about another year or to get published, or
no, I don't think so.
no?
I would say about 4 to 5 months because I'm probably
Okay.
going to self-publish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. And people can find your current book in all the usual places, Amazon, and your website too, perhaps?
Um, yeah, kaysparlingbooks.com. And then,
Hmm.
of course, we have Amazon, and that's throughout the world. Um, and then we have Barnes and Noble, we have Indigo, we have Booktopia, which I think is down in Australia.
Hmm.
So yeah, they're all on my website, all the areas that.
Okay. And up in Canada, where I am, Kobo. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, and Indigo, yeah.
Indigo, yes.
Yeah.
And do you do audio version of your book? Or are you planning
I
to?
I am planning to.
Okay.
There was my publicist just told me that I thought, well, when I asked my publisher, they said, well, you can't read your own book because we have to use equity actors. And I thought, well, goodness gracious, I'm
Mm.
an AGMA person forever. That's
Mhm.
our union in opera, and I have been a member of equity before when I was younger and was doing Broadway.
Right.
But, so they were kind of telling me that. And I was like, okay. Well, then my publicist told me that, oh, no, there's a way if you want to do it, because I have a recording studio in my home. If you
Wow.
want to do it, there is definitely a way that, you could produce that yourself. So I'm kind of working that out. But the fact that I am trying to get this book going,
Sure.
publicizing this book and writing the second, I'll probably end up hiring an equity actor. But
All
yes,
right.
that's going to come soon.
Okay, very cool. Well, that's all I've got. Is there anything that hasn't been mentioned that you would like to say at this time?
Um, try the book.
Try the book. Very good.
It's a good story, and what I want to say at the very end is one of the reasons I wrote this book is that all this that's about the refugees is true, and this
Mm,
very same thing is happening right now.
good.
So please give to, an institution that helps human trafficking,
Okay.
because it never went away, and we're
Okay.
looking at the same things. And so this book is trying to um, make people more aware of just what those people go through.
Oh,
It's
very
graphic,
noble. Yeah.
but but and if it becomes successful, I have decided that I am willing to give proceeds, to those organizations,
Well,
um,
very noble of you.
to help those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a blast talking to you, Kay. I wish you all the luck with the book and your future projects.
Well, thank you very much.
And thanks for taking the time to do this.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. Take care
Anytime.
now. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Take care now. Bye bye.